So our topic for today is all about cost accounting cycle. So, hold on pala. Okay, so our topic for today is all about cost accounting cycle. Our learning objectives are full understanding of the cost accounting cycle, what is the difference between merchandising and manufacturing operations, how manufacturing costs flow through accounts, what are the components of product costs, what are the overhead cost allocation system, what is predetermined overhead, how to account predetermined overhead, and how to prepare financial reports of a manufacturing operations. Oh, ay, wala na ako nabutak. Okay, so let's start. So what are the differences between merchandising operation and manufacturing operations? So here are a few. So product in merchandising operation, basically these are finished goods. So it's dealing with the buying and selling. So as what I have mentioned in our previous discussions, merchandising operations deals with buying supplies from the suppliers and then selling it to the customers on its original form. So kung shampoo, shampoo lahiya. Okay? So syempre there is what we call a retail price. So retail price is the higher price from the cost that we have paid to our supplier. So it's basically there's a markup on the cost that we have paid from the supplier to the supplier. Okay. On the other hand, manufacturing operation or manufacturing company, it purchases raw materials and then converting it into a finished goods. So it undergoes processes such as in the case of a ballpen manufacturing company, they undergo with the uh, assembly department, putting the ink. I'm not sure about what process is that, but there are different stages in converting the ballpen into its final form. Okay, so we have here types of inventories. In merchandising operation, of course, it is only one type of inventory or inventory. So it is what we call the merchandise inventory. And it is the actual form, the original form that we have purchased from the supplier, and then what we are selling also to our customers. So on the other hand, if we talk about the manufacturing operation, so there are three different types of inventories. One is the raw material inventory. These are the product or inventory that we are purchasing from the supplier. So basically, in terms of ballpen manufacturing company, these are the ink, these are the plastic container, these are the cups or what we call this? These are the takop hand ballpen. Okay. So these are the raw materials inventory, the materials that we are using in converting the product into what we ought to make. So another one is their work in process inventory. So these are the inventories that is being processed into the one that we want to sell to the customers, but these are not yet finished. So basically, that's why it is called as a work in process inventory. So ginhihimo pala hiya on the process of making the inventory. And then the last one is the finished goods inventory. Finished goods inventory are already the final output of the raw materials. So basically, we have three stages. First is nakadtuhiyahan raw materials classification, which is the original state of the inventory or naton yun order from supplier. Next is the work in process. From the raw materials inventory, ginbabalin hiya into work in process if we are going to start the conversion of the inventory. So gintatrabaho na hiya, ada na hiya ha factory, gagamit na, convert na hiya into the final product that we are going to sell to our customers. And last one is the finished goods inventory. So these inventories are the final output nga, sabi ko, di ba? So these are the from work in process, pag natapos na hiya, it is then transferred to the finished goods inventory. Okay. So cost of goods sold computation. So what are the differences between the two types of companies or two types of operation in terms of computation for cost of goods sold? So alam naman natin na when we were studying fundamentals of accounting theories and practice, or fundamentals of accountancy business and management subject, maaram nakitahan computation of the cost of goods sold. Basically, it is beginning inventory plus purchases is equal to cost of goods available for sale. Syempre, ang mga inventory nga aada na ha iyo, dudugangan hanyo ginpalit, amo it iyo available for sale, amo tiyo pwede mabaligya. And to know how much is the cost of goods sold, you just have to subtract the ending inventory, which is the inventory that's still on hand. Syempre, why are you going to record, or why are you going to make it a part of your cost of goods sold if it is still in your company or in your office building? So why are you going to include it in your cost of goods sold? So amo nga gindididak naton an ending inventory because it is not yet part of the expense portion, because cost of goods sold is an expense. Okay. Next one, how about if we talk about the manufacturing operation? We have a bit longer process in terms of cost of goods sold computation. It's because we have 3 stages: the raw material inventory, work in process, and then the finished goods. So basically, amoy nihiya it pag-compute for the cost of goods sold. So direct materials inventory plus raw material purchases. So it is inventory beginning, of course, then raw materials purchases, then puro parehas bahan cost of goods available for sale, but more specific here because there are different types of inventory: direct raw materials available for use, less indirect raw materials inventory, and is equal to direct raw materials used. Okay. And then because it also composes of direct labor, because direct labor is part of the product cost, that's why it is part of the cost of goods sold. Okay. So direct raw materials used plus direct labor plus overhead equals total manufacturing cost plus work in process inventory beginning is equal to cost of goods put into production minus work in process inventory end, that is what we call the cost of goods manufactured, plus finished goods inventory beginning, cost of goods sold available for sale, which is equal to this one. Less finished goods inventory end is equal to cost of goods sold. So bagat gintag usa-usa lahiya, beginning plus purchases minus ending, but then nga tanan hera upod. And raw materials, direct labor, pati na an overhead. Okay, there's another way to compute for that using a T account. So I will show it to you here. Nga din nila. Excel file. Wait, new. Okay, raw material. So beginning plus purchases less ending equals raw material used. Tapos pagkatapos sa raw materials inventory, then we are going to transfer it to work in process. Okay. Left. This is what we call the work in process inventory. So ini nga raw material used, anay, butang lani na to beginning work in process plus raw material used, amay niya. Transfer na nato niya nga da. And then direct labor, overhead, which is a product cost ha. DMDL overhead ending is equal to cost of goods manufactured. Anong tawagin niya? Beginning RMUs, direct labor overhead, ano tawag ito? Dito nga diha. DMDL, hay na ba ito? Use direct labor, yan. Cost of goods put into production ha. Cost of goods put into production. Hay nito hiya dapit nga di. Amo ini hiya. Cost of goods put into production. Ha, bangin ka mamalipat. Cost of goods put into production inira. Nga tanan nga tikang dinhi upod ang direct labor pati overhead, these are the cost of goods put into production. Pag igupod niyo beginning minus ending, it's what we call the cost of goods manufactured. And then, syempre, our goal here is to compute for the cost of goods sold. So we still have to make another T account, which is for the finished goods. Okay, let me check if may adat ti sulod nga waray ko ka-accept. Okay, wala nata. Okay, so here, this is the finished goods inventory. I'm just gonna put FG. So beginning again, syempre per may beginning, syempre may ending. So cost of goods manufactured, di ba anyan higin butang naton nga da, iniliwat dadanaso naton nga di. Cost of goods manufactured. And then, ending equals cost of sales or cost of goods sold. Cost of goods sold. Okay. So, I'm on ending product. So, if we are going to look for the profit, so meaning how much is the profit? Syempre, mabiling kita how much is the sales, how much is the cost of goods sold, how much are the expenses, other expenses aside from the cost of goods sold. Then, makikita na natin ang net income. Net income. Kung yung magyakan lao, how much is the gross profit? Sales minus cost of goods sold la ito iya. Kung upod net expenses, net income na ito aton bibilingon. Okay? So, kindly take note of these 3 T accounts because this will be very important because when I was still undergrad, I was having a hard time memorizing the formula. Medyo nalilipong talaga kadto, especially during the first view ko hading ang formula. But then using the T account, medyo na mas napadalian akong pag-memorize hadi. But I'm still using this type of solution using the T accounts. So it's up to you guys kung anot iyo mas prefer nga formula. But it's just the same, it's just an presentation is different. Okay. So raw materials inventory, I have already discussed this one. So I'm just gonna expound or relate to what is being presented on your material. So these are the costs of raw materials purchased but not yet issued to production. It is classified into 2 categories, direct and indirect materials. On the computation of cost of goods sold, the direct materials are the only materials added in the computation of the separate line item. Materials used, so direct materials na inihiya. Since indirect materials are classified as part of the overhead account, diba? We have already discussed that indirect materials and indirect labor are part of overhead account. However, regardless of its classification, whether direct or indirect, both of them will be reported as part of the cost of goods sold. It is important to take note that they only differ in the presentation of the line items in the cost of goods sold account. Okay. So I think it was very clear nga mag-iba and presentation la, but then it is still part of the cost of goods sold, regardless of it is direct or indirect. Okay. Work in process inventory, these are the cost of a product that is still in the production process. So, anyakan ko kanina, ginhihimo pala hiya, in converting pala hiya into the final output that we are going to sell to our customers. So, all elements of the product cost, namely direct materials, direct labor, and overhead, are already added but are not yet completed in the end of a period. So that is what we call the work in process inventory. And then last one is the finished goods inventory. Once goods in the work in process inventory are completed, they are transferred into finished goods inventory. These are manufacturing costs of a product that is already completed and available for sale. So amo na to, na-mention ko na to iya, I just recalled it para for retention purposes. Okay. So accounts to be used to record the flow of costs. Raw materials inventory, cost of materials that is not issued to production. It is an asset. It is presented in the balance sheet. Work in process inventory, cost of goods put into production but not yet completed. It is also an asset because it is an inventory and it is part of the balance sheet as part of current asset, because inventory is a form of, is included in the current asset section of the balance sheet. Same with the finished goods inventory. Cost of completed goods but not yet sold. So it is also an asset and it is reported in the balance sheet as part of the current asset section. Whereas cost of goods sold, I have already mentioned this one. Cost of goods, cost of completed goods but are already sold. So these are already expenses. So it is presented in the income statement. Okay. So familiar, amoy niyan akon gin present kanina, but this is just a more detailed presentation. Nakikita niyo may ada freight in, of course, it is still part of the raw materials inventory, the freight in, excess materials returned from production, balik kita nga di. So kindly just look into this, pero pare-parehas la ito hiya. Same na ito na akong gin-present sa iyo. Beginning, DMDL overhead, cost of goods manufactured, excess material returned to warehouse. Okay. So cost of goods manufactured, adding adi. Total manufacturing cost. That's for work in process inventory. Mali pong lahian pagka-present nga di, pero mas madali na laad to kitaon na nakadiyati account. Okay. So overhead control, this is how to record the over-applied and under-applied overhead. So later na ito hiya nga pag-discuss. Just a glimpse of the T account na lang. Makikitaan pa ito niyo if we deal with the problem solving na. Okay. Manufacturing cost flow and how they are reported. In manufacturing industries, before goods are sold to market, such goods undergo to 3 stages. The first stage is where elements of a manufacturing cost, direct materials, direct labor, and overhead are being pulled in. Once combined, goods will be processed, and at the end of a period, all goods that were started but not completed are classified as work in process and will be reported as work in process inventory. Of course, syempre ang ginpa-process pala nga diri pa human, aada pa ito ha work in process inventory. Igin-recall ko hiya para madali maka-remember. The last phase is the transfer of completed goods from the work in process account to finished goods account. All finished goods are ready and available for sale, and once sold, the cost incurred in manufacturing those products will be reported under the cost of goods sold account. Pareha sa di nga akong ginbuhat ha, sales minus cost of goods sold, amo na niya. Okay. So, adiya klasa an illustration on how it happens. Raw materials, amo na din yung example in manufacturing furniture. So an example of raw materials here are the wood planks, screws, lacquer, sandpaper, etc. So work in process inventory, upudnaan, direct materials, direct labor, and assembly workers ang nagtatrabaho ito nga direct ang paraghimo good ang nagpapanday kumbaga, or I'm not sure of the right term, basta ang hands-on nga naghihimo ito. Production supervisors. And then lastly is the manufacturing overhead. Syempre, manufacturing overhead includes indirect materials, indirect labor, and other overhead costs such as an kuryente, utilities expense, and then ano pa ba? Factory rental, of course, it's also part of other overhead costs. Okay. And then it is then being combined in the work in process inventory and being converted into the final product, which is the finished goods. So here, cost of goods manufactured, then adina, na-convert na natin into tables, into chairs, into what do we call this one? Side table ata ito. And then I'm not sure what type, basta mga table inihira, dining table and so on. And then, kapag nabaligyan na naton hiya ngadto ha customers, it's the time nga magiging upod na hiya cost of goods sold. Ang mga giniiba naton an ending nga finished goods inventory because ending finished goods inventory is not yet sold. Ada pa aton custody. Okay. So from there, is everything clear ba? Hello? Hello people? Is everything clear?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much ang mga nabaton. I really appreciate it. Okay, so this part is just a more detailed discussion with regards to product costs. So product costs are inventoriable costs. These are costs that are directly related with the manufacturing, and then these are part of cost of goods sold. Syempre, because these are part of inventory, ngayon kita nakuhaan cost of goods sold, di ba inventory, so nagiging part hiyahan aton cost of goods sold. Composed of direct materials, direct labor, and overhead. So direct material, any material that can be directly traced to a product. Adi ha, makikitan pa ba naton ang wood nganhi? Of course. Makikitan ba naton nganhi an raisang? Of course. Makikitan pa ba naton nganhi an ano pa ba gamit nera? An screw? Of course. An sandpaper, syempre makikitan pa naton nga nahamis ito hiya. Syempre, ginamitan naton ito in sandpaper. Lacquer, syempre. Okay. Paper used in the publishing a book, foam cushion, sofa. Okay. Direct labor. So next is direct labor. It refers to the disbursements made for the time spent by individuals who work directly to manufacture a product. Ang ginsweldohan, naghihimohan lamesa. That's part of direct labor. Includes basic compensation, product efficiency bonuses, and employers' share to government agencies' contribution. Adiha, there's a note here. Overtime premiums are not part of direct labor cost. It is being treated as overhead. So, kung may add ang mga overtime, diri ngay anhiya part han direct labor. It's part of overhead na. Okay, another. Okay, yeah. Adi naman, an factory worker who is directly involved with the manufacturing. So, I think it's very clear to you now. Last is manufacturing overhead. These are not directly traceable to a product, but are related to manufacturing a product, composed of indirect materials, indirect labor, and indirect production costs and quality costs. Can be both variable and fixed. Adi ha, recall naton ha, ako na-mention kanina nga screws, nga nails, and paper, ayun. So these are part of variable manufacturing overhead because indirect material ito hiya. Ha, kuano naton ha, direct material and wood. And rice ang na-mention kanina, it's part of indirect material. And sandpaper nga ko na-mention kanina, it's part of indirect material. Okay. Ay na bad. Okay. Indirect labor paid on an hourly basis such as salaries of product supervisors, plant manager, and quality inspector. So, di ba aada lagya peraha factory, but then they are not directly related with the hands-on nga pagmanufacturehan product because they are tasked with the overseeing of the laborer. So, diri iton considered as direct labor. It's part of indirect labor, which is a variable manufacturing overhead. And then variable components such as utilities expense, of course, it is part of overhead, variable manufacturing overhead. On the other hand, we have the fixed manufacturing overhead. Example is indirect labor if it is not paid on an hourly basis. Like for example, an aton supervisor, ina ba? An aton quality inspector or product supervisor are not paid on a hourly basis, but they are paid on a monthly basis. So it will form part of the fixed manufacturing overhead kasi fixed naman ang era type of salary na. They're inahiya based on hours. So, ayun. Other examples of fixed manufacturing overhead are other costs that are attributable to factory and production but are indirect in nature, such as factory licensing fees, factory insurance, basta nga tanan nga mga other nga expenses nga related to the factory and production nga diri hiya direct. So these are part of fixed manufacturing overhead as long as they are fixed in a